Everyone has heard the phrase, actions speak louder than words. It is repeated so often it has lost all precision, which is exactly the problem. Because when a man is falling for you but is not yet able to say it, his actions do not speak loudly. They whisper. They show up in the half-second decisions his conscious mind is not supervising, the involuntary lean, the specific quality of his attention, the things he remembers that he was never explicitly asked to remember. If you are waiting for a loud signal, you will miss every one of them. Here is the logic gap I want to establish before we go any further. We have been culturally conditioned to read love as a declaration. Something said, something performed, something visible enough to screenshot and share. But the neuroscience of attachment tells a different story. The earliest and most reliable signals of deep attraction are not verbal. They are physiological. They happen in the body before the mind has caught up, and in many men, particularly those socialized to treat emotional disclosure as a vulnerability, the body will betray the feeling long before the mouth ever forms the words. By the end of this session, you will have a precise, layered framework for reading those pre-verbal signals. Not to manipulate the dynamic, but to stop misreading it, to stop interpreting his silence as absence, when it is actually the most articulate thing he has said. I want to start with a viewer comment that came in this week. A woman named Priya wrote, "He acts like he cares when we're together, but the moment we're apart, it's like I don't exist." That specific gap, present when together, absent when apart, is not random. It is one of the most consistent behavioral signatures of a man experiencing feelings he has not yet found language for. And it is exactly what we are going to decode tonight. Let me introduce you to a composite case I will call James and Nadia. They have been in each other's orbit for about 2 months. Not officially together, not officially casual, in that specific suspended middle ground that has its own particular kind of tension. James is not a man who talks about feelings. His friends would describe him as steady, reliable, someone who shows up rather than someone who speaks up. Nadia has started noticing a cluster of behaviors that do not quite add up to the picture of a man who is indifferent, but also do not add up to the picture of a man who has made a decision. He remembers things she mentioned once, weeks ago. The name of her sister's dog, the project at work she was stressed about, the specific coffee order she gave once without thinking. He has never once said, "I'm thinking about you." But the evidence of his thinking about her is scattered across dozens of small details. When they are in a group setting, his body consistently orients toward her, even when he is talking to someone else. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone would clock, but she has noticed that his feet point in her direction, regardless of where the conversation has him facing. And when something funny happens and he laughs, his eyes go to her first, before anyone else in the room, for approximately 1/2 of a second before he recovers and redirects his gaze. None of these things are what Nadia was taught to look for. She was taught to look for declarations. She is sitting with a man who is doing something much older and much harder to fake, and she does not yet have the framework to read it accurately. Before we move into the biological layer 1 of this mystery, take a moment to join our community. If you're serious about mastering these dynamics, hit the subscribe button. We don't just give tips here, we provide the architectural blueprints of the human heart. Layer 1, the words, or more precisely, the pattern of what he chooses to remember and repeat back. Language researchers who study attachment behavior have documented what is sometimes called active listening residue, the tendency of individuals in a state of heightened attachment to retain and later reference specific details from prior conversations at a rate significantly above baseline. James's recall of the sister's dog, the work project, the coffee order is not a party trick. It is a physiological artifact of elevated attention. When the brain tags something as significant, when it places a higher value on a piece of incoming information, retention improves automatically, without effort or intention. He is not trying to remember. He is remembering because his nervous system has classified what she says as high-value information, and high-value information gets stored. The words he uses are ordinary. The pattern of what he keeps is the data. Layer 2, the body language. The foot orientation, Nadia noticed, has a name in the field of nonverbal communication. It is called proxemic pointing, and it is one of the least controllable body language signals in the human repertoire because it operates entirely below the threshold of conscious supervision. We manage our faces, we manage our words, we manage our posture when we remember to. We almost never manage our feet because the neurological pathway between emotional orientation and lower body direction bypasses the prefrontal cortex entirely. It runs through older, faster circuitry that does not consult the part of the brain that worries about appearances. When his feet point at her in a group setting while his words are directed elsewhere, his nervous system is resolving a conflict between social performance and genuine draw. And genuine draw is winning at the level where performance cannot reach. The laugh and look reflex is equally significant and equally involuntary. Neuroimaging studies of social bonding have shown that when we experience a moment of pleasure or amusement, our gaze instinctively moves first toward the person our brain has most strongly associated with positive affect. Essentially, the person who matters most in the room at that moment. This is not a choice, it is a measurement. His eyes go to her first because she is, at the level of neural mapping, his primary reference point for positive experience in that environment. It lasts half a second before he catches it and redirects. That half second is the truth. Everything after it is the edit. Layer 3, the subconscious driver. What is producing this cluster of behaviors in a man who is not yet speaking? Neurochemically, the early stages of deep attachment are associated with elevated dopamine and norepinephrine activity, the same neurochemical signature as goal-directed motivation. The brain in early attachment is in a state of heightened orientation toward a target, which is why attention sharpens, recall improves, and orienting behaviors become more frequent and less controllable. But here is the layer that most content misses entirely. In men who have been socialized to treat emotional vulnerability as a liability, whether through upbringing, prior relational experience, or cultural conditioning, the experience of these neurochemical states is not simply pleasant. It is disorienting because the feelings are running at a volume the person does not yet have the internal language to process or the external language to express. I know this sounds like neuroscience for its own sake. Stay with me, because this next part is the reason Priya's comment makes complete sense. When a man is experiencing attachment neurochemistry at a level that exceeds his capacity to process it verbally, the feelings intensify in person and dissipate, or more precisely become manageable, when physical proximity is removed. When he is with her, the neurochemical signal is high, the orienting behaviors are active, the recall is operating. When he is apart from her, the signal drops to a level his regulatory system can handle without the behaviors becoming visible. This is why he seems present when they are together and absent when they are not. He is not switching the feeling on and off. The feeling is running continuously. The behavioral expression of it simply requires his nervous system to be in the same room as its source to fully surface. If you're starting to see how these hidden dynamics have been playing out in your own life, and you want to master the science of human connection, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Here at the Core Dynamics, we don't just give dating tips. We decode the biological truth so you never have to guess again. Join the community now so you don't miss our next deep dive. Before we go into the roadmap, I want you to take one honest moment. If you have ever been around someone who remembered the small things, whose eyes found yours first in a crowded room, who was unmistakably more present in person than in any message, hit like on this video and comment the word decode below. That cluster of behaviors has a name now, and I want to see how many of you have been living inside it without the framework to read it. Here's the roadmap for navigating this specific situation with clarity rather than anxiety. Stop auditing the distance for evidence of disinterest. The absent when apart pattern is not a sign that what happens in person is performance. It is a sign that what happens in person is real and is operating at a neurochemical level that requires proximity to fully surface. Auditing the silence between interactions for proof of his feelings will consistently produce false negatives, because the silence is not where the information lives. Build your read from the in-person cluster, not the digital one. The signals that matter in this pattern are the ones that cannot be faked and cannot be consciously managed. Foot orientation, first glance direction after a laugh, the specific texture of his recall. These are the data points. Text frequency and response time are among the most manipulable and least reliable indicators of genuine attachment. And in this particular pattern, they will consistently underrepresent what is actually happening. Do not name what you are seeing before he has language for it. One of the most common and most costly mistakes in this dynamic is the early, direct conversation. Do you have feelings for me? What are we? Before the person has developed internal language for what they are experiencing. For a man whose feelings are running ahead of his vocabulary for them, being asked to articulate what he cannot yet articulate does not accelerate the disclosure. It triggers the same threat response we decoded in our last session. The feeling becomes a stake, the stake becomes a risk, and the nervous system responds to risk by creating distance. Let the behaviors accumulate. Let the pattern become undeniable to him before you ask him to name it. Create conditions where disclosure becomes lower cost. This does not mean engineering conversations. It means choosing contexts, low pressure, low audience, low stakes, where the social cost of saying something true is minimized. Side-by-side activities rather than face-to-face ones. Environments where conversation can happen without the intensity of direct eye contact, requiring him to perform emotional composure at the same time as emotional disclosure. Walking, driving, cooking, these are not accidental contexts for important conversations. They are structurally easier for this specific nervous system profile. Watch for the language shift, not the declaration. The sign that a man in this pattern is moving toward verbal disclosure is rarely the sudden declaration. It is a gradual shift in the tense and subject of his language. From, that would be fun, to we should do that, to, I want to do that with you. The grammar of inclusion arrives before the grammar of feeling. When his language starts placing the two of you inside a shared future without being prompted, the declaration is forming. It is just forming at the pace his nervous system can sustain. So what happened with James and Nadia? She stopped auditing his texts and started reading the room. She noticed the foot orientation. She noticed the laugh and look. She stopped asking friends, "Do you think he likes me?" and started building a read from the in-person data. 3 weeks later, on a walk, side by side, no direct eye contact, James said something that was not a declaration in any conventional sense. He mentioned a restaurant he wanted to try and said, "We should go when it opens." It was 4 words inside a longer sentence. It was also the first time he had placed them in a shared future without being invited to. Nadia, who now had the framework to read it, recognized it for exactly what it was. She matched his pace. The relationship that followed moved at the speed his language could sustain, which, it turned out, was faster than either of them had expected once the first sentence landed safely. The signs were never absent. They were simply running in a channel most people are not taught to tune into. You are now tuned in. If this decoded something for you, subscribe to the Core Dynamics. We release a new session every week with exactly this level of precision. And in our next session, we decode what his body language is actually communicating when he thinks no one is watching. The involuntary signals that reveal more about his true feelings than anything he will ever say directly. I'll see you there.